The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 26, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. We're going to put the opinion and editorial pages first for a change. Why Putin was rooting for a U.S. invasion of Greenland. Without lifting a finger, Russia seemed about to vanquish its main opponent, NATO, by Angela Stent.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the January 26, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. We're going to put the opinion and editorial pages first for a change. Why Putin was rooting for a U.S. invasion of Greenland. Without lifting a finger, Russia seemed about to vanquish its main opponent, NATO, by Angela Stent. When Vladimir Putin was elected president of Russia in 2000, a reporter asked what he did as a KGB case officer in Dresden, East Germany. Mr. Putin's response: "We were interested in any information about the main opponent, as we called them, and the main opponent was NATO." The mission hasn't changed. In office, Mr. Putin has consistently sought to weaken the Western Alliance. Since its founding in 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been the Kremlin's #1 enemy. Successive Soviet and Russian leaders sought to undermine the alliance and separate the U.S. from Europe. Mr. Putin and his inner circle can only marvel at the dangerous game President Trump has been playing. His confrontation with the Allies over Greenland's future threatened to damage the world's most successful alliance in a way that decades of Russian sabotage failed to do. The gap between the U.S. and its allies, on full display this week, can only reinforce Mr. Putin's conviction that the transatlantic alliance is seriously weakened. The Soviet Union's answer to NATO was the Warsaw Treaty Organization, created in 1955. Before disbanding in 1991, it was the only such alliance in history whose members invaded each other. Soviet troops invaded Hungary in 1956, and Warsaw Pact troops marched into Czechoslovakia in 1968. These invasions ensured Soviet supremacy in Eastern Europe. Mr. Putin aspires to control the former Warsaw Pact states, as he made clear in the draft treaty he presented to NATO before Russia invaded Ukraine. After the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the future of NATO was debated in Russia and the West. Did it still have a purpose? Communism was defeated, and Russia wanted to become a democracy. What was the need for this Cold War relic? Why not create an all-European security organization in which Russia and the U.S. would have an equal voice? While Russians and their Western supporters argued for a new Euro-Atlantic security architecture, NATO and its supporters understood that the world's most successful alliance shouldn't disband, but adapt and admit those former Warsaw Pact states that were clamoring to join. The Clinton administration offered Russia a distinctive partnership with NATO, hoping to give Moscow a stake in the transatlantic order. The NATO-Russian Founding Act was signed in Paris in 1997, but it did little to diminish the Russian conviction that NATO was the adversary. Mr. Putin, early in his presidency, discussed the possibility of joining NATO with both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, but it became clear that Russia wouldn't join an alliance it couldn't dominate. Mr. Putin's antipathy toward NATO has only grown. The Kremlin has increasingly supported European political parties and groups on the left and right that oppose NATO and the U.S. Mr. Putin justified Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 by declaring that if Russia hadn't moved, it would have meant that NATO's Navy would be right there in the city of Russia's military glory, and this would create not an illusory, but a perfectly real threat to the whole of southern Russia. Mr. Putin doesn't fear NATO because it threatens Russian physical security. Rather, he understands that expanding NATO membership to former Soviet states and Warsaw Pact members undermines his goal of reestablishing Russia's sphere of influence. NATO remains the chief obstacle to Mr. Putin's imperial ambitions. Had Ukraine been a member of NATO, Russia wouldn't have dared to invade it. How ironic, then, that a dispute between the U.S. and its allies over a NATO member's territory could end up undermining NATO and helping Mr. Putin realize his goal of subjugating Ukraine. It was hard to imagine before that such a thing could happen, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Tuesday. He added that it could create a scenario in which one NATO member is going to attack another NATO member. Although 3 NATO members, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, have experienced something similar. Ms. Stent is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest. From the editorial page, Donald Trump, not unchained. His reversal on Greenland shows the limits of his power. A funny thing happened this week that you wouldn't think possible from reading the common narrative of President Trump as a Frankenstein's monster unchained to do whatever he wants. He backed down from his demands to own Greenland, and he did so after financial markets, European allies, and the U.S. Congress raised objections. The authoritarian Trump narrative was wrong again. This isn't to dismiss Mr. Trump's often wild demands and threats. They have consequences in lost trust among allies and doubts about American reliability. These costs are hard to quantify, but they are real and may show up in a future crisis. But the reality is also that, despite his over-the-top rhetoric, Mr. Trump can't get away with whatever he likes. He is constrained by democratic institutions in the U.S., the necessity of maintaining alliances abroad, and public opinion as measured by polls and investors. The Greenland saga is a telling example. Last Saturday, Mr. Trump issued his demand to own the icy island, and he vowed to impose tariffs on Europe to compel a sale. Opposition built over the holiday weekend, and financial markets cast a decidedly negative vote on the tariffs and threats on Tuesday. Members of Congress spoke against the use of military force in Greenland, with even GOP leaders expressing doubts. One senator told us that if Mr. Trump had gone ahead, Congress would have voted to cut off funds for an invasion and with veto-proof majorities. European leaders also made clear that taking Greenland by force, military or otherwise, would break the NATO alliance. And what do you know? On Wednesday in Davos, Mr. Trump issued his familiar criticisms of Europe's weakness, many of which are accurate. But he disavowed the use of force, and by the end of the day he had canceled the tariffs and claimed victory over what he called a framework deal over Greenland that he said would make everyone happy. The details have to be negotiated and things could still blow up. But the news is that Mr. Trump claimed victory on terms that appeared to be much less than he had demanded on the weekend and were probably achievable without the drama and bluster. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said this was Mr. Trump's plan all along. But if you believe that, you probably believe he planned to back down on his Liberation Day tariffs too. The story here isn't TACO, taco, that Trump always chickens out in the Wall Street jibe. It's that Mr. Trump isn't all-powerful. As a Democratic leader in a constitutional republic, he must cope with checks and balances. It's true that on foreign affairs, a president has more running room. He can use military force without the approval of Congress or the courts. He can try to appease dictators, as Barack Obama and Joe Biden did. Presidents can do a lot of unilateral damage. But Mr. Trump also has to be mindful of the results and the reaction from a variety of constituencies at home and abroad. The collapse of NATO on his watch would be a permanent stain on his presidential legacy. So would a Russian victory in Ukraine. But what about ICE raids in homes against non-criminal migrants, unilateral tariffs, and lawfare against political opponents? All of these are unwise and harmful to the individuals, even when they are legal. But when they exceed his legal power, the courts are a check. This week, a majority of the Supreme Court seems poised to block his firing of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Lindsay Halligan, his choice for U.S. Attorney, who issued indictments against Mr. Trump's enemies, was forced to step down after a judge appointed by Mr. Trump accused her of conducting an illegal charade to stay in the job. It's hard to know what Mr. Trump might do next, which feeds public anxiety. But as his popularity ebbs, so does his political capital. His approval rating has sunk. His mass deportations are seen as excessive. Tariffs are unpopular. And even GOP voters disliked his Greenland demands. Democrats took November's races in Virginia and New Jersey in a rout. The GOP House majority is in peril, and the Senate is competitive. Mr. Trump's attempts to gerrymander a safer House majority have backfired, as Democrats have done the same. The ultimate check on power is an election, and on that score, Mr. Trump's bulldozing governance may be building the opposition that cost his party its majority in November. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Measles as a cost of doing business. RFK Jr.'s deputy dismisses the latest disease outbreak. Are measles outbreaks now a cost of doing business in the U.S.? Remarkably, that's what a Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, official said last week. Let's hope his insouciance, indifference, isn't as contagious as the virus. More than 2,200 Americans were infected by measles last year, the most in more than 30 years. 3 died. The U.S. is on track to exceed last year's pace, with more than 300 cases confirmed this year. Upstate South Carolina is the epicenter of the latest outbreak, with 646 cases and some 90 reported in the last week. Most are in school-aged children. Measles is among the most contagious viruses. An infected person will transmit the virus on average to 18 others if those 18 haven't been vaccinated or previously infected. There's a real risk the U.S. could soon lose measles elimination status, which occurs when a country experiences continuing transmission for a year or longer. Asked by the press this week if he's worried about this, CDC Principal Deputy Director Ralph Abraham, recently appointed by Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., shrugged. "Not really," he replied. "You know, it's just the cost of doing business, with our borders being somewhat porous and global and international travel." Not really. Fewer than 2% of U.S. cases have been imported from abroad. But outbreaks happen when vaccination rates fall below the levels needed to maintain herd immunity, which is about 95%. The kindergarten vaccination rate in South Carolina was 91% during the 2024 to 25 school year. Outbreaks have increased since childhood immunizations have declined since the pandemic. In 2019, only 3 states had kindergarten measles vaccine rates below 90%. 16 did last year. A major culprit is a backlash to COVID vaccine mandates and the government health officials who prevaricated and condescended to the public. But Mr. Kennedy has fueled the vaccine distrust, even saying the vaccine causes disabilities and death, like the virus. It doesn't. In November, the CDC updated a vaccine safety webpage to state that the claim vaccines do not cause autism is not an evidence-based claim because studies have not ruled out the possibility that infant vaccines cause autism. Studies supporting a link have been ignored by health authorities. Like his boss, Dr. Abraham claims people should be free not to vaccinate children. Quote, "You know, the president, the health secretary, we talk all the time about religious freedom, health freedom, personal freedom, and I think we have to respect those communities that choose to go somewhat of a different route," he said. The problem with this line is that unvaccinated children can sicken infants and immunocompromised children who can't be inoculated, leaving some disabled or worse. In a better administration, government leaders would explain this to parents rather than brush aside serious illness as inconsequential. From the sports section, the NFL's coaching purge. Sean McDermott became the latest coach to lose his job after being fired by the Buffalo Bills. By Andrew Beaton. The Buffalo Bills were nothing short of a laughingstock when Sean McDermott took over as head coach in 2017. For 17 consecutive years, Buffalo hadn't reached a single postseason. McDermott instantly changed that, and with a young quarterback named Josh Allen, the team became a perennial contender. Over the course of 9 years, McDermott transformed the Bills into one of the most successful teams in the sport, except, that is, when it came to playoffs. On Monday, yet another postseason implosion, this time an overtime loss to the Denver Broncos, brought an end to McDermott's tenure. Not only did it stun the league, it also fanned the flames of the wildest NFL coaching purge in recent memories. There have now been 10 changes around the sport, tied for the most in a single season. The spate of moves is made all the more remarkable by the caliber of some of the coaches now looking for new jobs. The list includes 3 Super Bowl winners and decades of experience. Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh have each spent nearly 2 decades with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Baltimore Ravens, respectively, before heading out the door. Harbaugh was so sought after that he has already found new employment leading the New York Giants. And if Tomlin decides to coach again, he'll have his pick of jobs while the Steelers hunt for just their 4th coach in 58 years. Kevin Stefanski, a 2-time Coach of the Year with Cleveland, was in similarly high demand after the Browns dismissed him, and already has a new gig in charge of the Atlanta Falcons. It wouldn't be a surprise if a few others also landed new opportunities soon. But few dismissals were more shocking than McDermott's after he raked up 7 consecutive winning seasons, 8 playoff appearances in 9 years, and a 98-50 regular season records. Yet Bills owner Terry Pegula walked into the locker room after the playoff loss, saw Josh Allen sobbing, and felt none of that history, excused his failure to reach a single Super Bowl. My decision to bring in a new coach was based on the results of our game in Denver, Pegula said Wednesday. I felt like we hit the proverbial playoff wall year after year. If the Bills acted drastically, it was because of a lingering fear that they were letting Allen's prime years go to waste. Buffalo drafted Allen with the number 7 pick in 2018 to replace journeyman quarterback Tyrod Taylor. Though Allen struggled initially and posted below average passing numbers, McDermott's defense carried the Bills into the playoffs in Allen's second year. But when Allen truly broke out in 2020, the Bills became dangerous on both sides of the ball. Since then, they have boasted the best offense and defense in the NFL. Over that span, they have outscored opponents by 903 points in the regular season, over 300 points more than any other club. The problem was what happened once the playoffs began. During McDermott's time, Buffalo went just 8-8 in the postseason. 4 of those losses came against a team that repeatedly managed what the Bills couldn't, actually winning a Super Bowl. With Patrick Mahomes, who was drafted 1 year before Allen, the Kansas City Chiefs have racked up 3 championships. So while McDermott went 5-1 against the Chiefs during the regular season, he remained winless in the playoffs against coach Andy Reid, his former boss with the Philadelphia Eagles. Those defeats include at least one instance when McDermott's coaching came into question. Kansas City's 42-36 overtime victory in the divisional round after the 2021 season is mainly remembered for Mahomes' heroic drive to put his team into position for a game-tying field goal after the Bills took the lead with 13 seconds left in the fourth quarter. But in the aftermath, many questioned why Buffalo sent its kickoff into the end zone rather than quibbling it to force a return and take critical seconds off the clock. 4 years later, it took another overtime to end McDermott's tenure. This one left McDermott fuming after a critical call by the officials confirmed an interception by the Broncos. The Bills were convinced that it should have been ruled a catch by the receiver. Now, instead of playing in this week's AFC Championship game, the Bills are searching for a coach who can make the most of Allen's gifts and turn them into a Super Bowl. Allen will even have a say in the hire, Pegula said. As for McDermott, there is some small consolation for being fired. Considering the NFL's wide-open job market, he couldn't pick a better time to be an out-of-work football coach. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, time for ice to pause in Minneapolis. Alex Preddy made a mistake, but he wasn't a domestic terrorist. When Donald Trump visited the Journal in October 2024, he was asked how he'd implement his mass deportation policy to avoid appearing to be cruel and inviting a political backlash. His answer was surprisingly nuanced. He said he had to deport illegal migrants because we can't handle these people coming in right now. But the interest from the heart, yeah, something's got to be done. I'm not going to do that. Separate families. I can't do that. Okay, thank you. Really good question. I mean, there's some human questions that get in the way of being perfect, and we have to have the heart too. Okay? 15 months later in Minneapolis, there is much heart in immigration and customs enforcement. The Saturday shooting of Alex Preddy as he lay on the ground surrounded by ICE agents is the worst incident to date in what is becoming a moral and political debacle for the Trump presidency. Videos of an event aren't always definitive, but this is how it looks to us. Preddy attempted, foolishly, to assist a woman who had been pepper sprayed by agents. Multiple agents then tackled Preddy, and he had a phone in one hand as he lay on the ground. An agent discovered a concealed gun on Preddy and disarmed him. An agent then shot Preddy, and multiple shots followed. The Trump administration's spin on this simply isn't believable. Stephen Miller, the political architect of the mass deportation policy, called Preddy a domestic terrorist. He was a nurse without a criminal record. Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, said the fact that he carried a gun, and she said 2 magazines, meant he arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement. But he had a license to carry a gun, which was legally concealed, not carried in his hand, as some claimed. He was carrying his phone. To hear the ardent gun rights advocates of the Trump administration claim he had malicious intentions because he carried a concealed weapon is bizarre. Preddy made a tragic mistake by interfering with ICE agents, but that warranted arrest, not a death sentence. The agents may say they felt threatened, but it's worth noting the comments over the weekend by police around the country who say that this isn't how they conduct law enforcement. Either many ICE agents aren't properly trained, or they are so on edge as they face opposition in the streets that they are on a hair trigger. Either way, this calls for rethinking how ICE conducts itself, especially in Minneapolis as tensions build. After the shooting of Renee Good 2 weeks ago, both Minnesota Democrats and Mr. Trump had a chance to calm the furies. Mr. Trump instead sent 1,000 more immigration officers on top of the 2,000 already there. Minneapolis has only 600 police officers. Governor Tim Walz could have urged his citizens to avoid confrontations with ICE. Instead, he made a video urging them to go into the streets with phones and film ICE agents, whether or not they are performing lawful searches under federal immigration law. His rhetoric is incendiary and describes ICE as a lawless terrorist operation. Another tragedy was inevitable, and there will be more if this continues. Whether he likes it or not, most of the burden now lies with Mr. Trump as the president who controls ICE. He would be wise to pause ICE enforcement in the Twin Cities to ease tensions and consider a less provocative strategy. Yes, many on the left would conclude that their civil disobedience has paid off. But Mr. Trump can still pursue enforcement with a smaller force and a strategy aimed at criminals, not at hotel maids and gardeners. Mr. Trump and his advisors could also help themselves and the country by explaining what they are trying to do and sounding conciliatory. Ms. Noem and Mr. Miller aren't credible spokesmen. Their social media and cable TV strategy is to own the libs rather than to persuade Americans. This is backfiring against Republicans. The violence in Minneapolis has erased the state's welfare fraud from the headlines, which, no doubt, pleases Mr. Walz. It's also given Democrats in Washington an excuse to shut down the government a second time over the Homeland Security funding bill. Mr. Miller's mass deportation methods are turning immigration, an issue Mr. Trump owned in 2024, into a political liability for Republicans in 2026. Americans don't want law enforcement shooting people in the street or arresting 5-year-old boys. The president, who said you have to have a heart in enforcement, ought to show some. Now to the front page. What's news? Business and finance. Zootopia 2 eclipsed Avatar, Fire and Ash, to become Disney's highest grossing movie release of 2025 at the global box office. Behind the crash of Intel's stock price last week were investors who were reminded of the deep operational problems that left the once great chip maker in need of a rescue in the first place. Merck is no longer in discussions to buy Revolution Medicines, abandoning a quest for a deal that could have valued the cancer drug biotech at around $30 billion. Solo sued Meta Platforms and EssilorLuxottica, alleging that the companies infringed on its patents for smart glasses technologies. A Jefferies Group-backed investment fund sued FAT, F-A-T, Brands, claiming the restaurant financier defaulted on its debt by failing to deliver certain pledged shares. Swedish buyout group EQT agreed to acquire UK-based private equity firm Collar Capital for up to $3.7 billion. EQT is leading a $300 million investment in hospitality management software provider Muse in a bet on the power of AI to transform the hotel industry. Cyclic Materials, which just raised $75 million from investors, plans to open an Arizona recycling facility to mine expired electronics for valuable commodities. Cyber insurer Beasley said it turned down a fifth takeover offer from Switzerland-based Zurich Insurance that values the UK company at $10.30 billion. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. The fatal weekend shooting of a second person in Minneapolis this year by immigration agents escalated an already tense battle between state and U.S. officials over federal operations in that area. Trump declined to say whether the officer who fired had acted appropriately and said the administration is reviewing the incident. Senate Democrats, angered by the shooting, said they wouldn't vote for a government funding package without major changes to its homeland security provisions. China's senior general was accused of leaking information about the country's nuclear weapons program to the U.S. and accepting bribes. The Pentagon adopted a conciliatory tone toward Beijing in its new defense strategy, emphasizing strategic stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Trump said the U.S. would impose 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods coming into the U.S. if Canada makes a deal with China, escalating a brewing trade war between the North American neighbors. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends children be vaccinated against 18 diseases, more than the U.S. government directs, after it overhauled its schedule. Israel is backing new militias fighting Hamas in parts of Gaza that are supposed to be off limits to Israeli troops. Eleanor Holmes Norton, the District of Columbia's longtime delegate to Congress, moved to end her re-election campaign. The picture on today's front page shows a highway where a huge tree covered in ice has fallen across the street, and a car is underneath the tree. That caption, "Big Freeze." A blast of heavy snow and Arctic temperatures hit much of the country on Sunday. Downed tree branches in Nashville, Tennessee, caused many to lose power. The headline, "Winter Wallops Much of the U.S." The article, "Potent Storm Lashes Large Swath of U.S. Over 2 million are in the path as roads freeze, power goes out, trees fall," by Elisa Lutpat, Joseph Pisani, and Colin Eaton. A massive winter storm is disrupting swaths of the U.S., dropping snow, freezing roads, and causing thousands of flight cancellations and power outages. Almost 200 million people were in the path of the storm, which is straining the nation's power grid and travel infrastructure. The storm has already been blamed for 11,900 flight cancellations, affecting airports from Dallas to Boston, and has left more than 900,000 power customers in the dark, mainly in the South. The outages hit hardest in Tennessee, where more than 300,000 customers lost power. More than 200,000 of those were in the Nashville area. The Nashville Electric Service said the outages could last days or longer, although the utility will mobilize scores of line workers throughout the day. At Kings Hill House of Prayer, on a hill overlooking Nashville, Crystal Nelson, an intercessory missionary, said her community of missionaries lost power around 7:30 a.m. Without a generator, Nelson's community was considering huddling together in their warmest rooms. Nelson, a Floridian until she moved to Nashville in November, said this ice storm is her first. "There are trees down everywhere. We couldn't get out if we wanted to," she said. "This isn't usual for Nashville, so we're not all that prepared." The storm began to lash the central and southern parts of the country with snow on Saturday and the Northeast on Sunday. Some regions, including parts of the Northeast, could expect about 2 feet of snow, according to the National Weather Service. Some areas declared states of emergency ahead of the storm. Forecasters said the storm would stretch 2,000 miles from New Mexico to Maine. "It's rare to have that wide of an expanse," said David Hamrick, a meteorologist at the National Weather Service. Frigid temperatures should keep things icy for the rest of the week, Hamrick said. Forecasters said the cold could be life-threatening and warned people to avoid traveling. New York City's Central Park got 8.8 inches of snow at 4:15 p.m. Sunday, according to the National Weather Service, the biggest snowfall there since 2021. So far, most power in Texas has stayed on. About 73,000 customers were left in the dark as of Sunday afternoon, largely near the state's eastern border with Louisiana, where more than 125,000 had lost power. Houston, Dallas, Austin, and their surrounding suburbs in Texas only had about 1,700 power customers without electricity among them. Electricity demand around the country pushed up February natural gas futures by another 15% when trading opened Sunday night. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Articles from the front page follow. New shooting fuels standoff in Minnesota. Control of evidence in latest killing deepens clash between state and federal officials. By Jack Morfitt, Brenna T. Smith, and Jack Gillum. The fatal weekend shooting of a second person in Minneapolis this year by immigration agents escalated an already tense battle between state and U.S. officials over federal law enforcement operations that have turned deadly. The Saturday morning killing of 37-year-old Alex Preddy, like the one earlier this month of Renee Good, 37, was captured on video from witnesses. Videos shared across social media of the moments before Saturday's shooting show Preddy filming federal officers and then being confronted by them. Agents appeared to spray a chemical irritant at Preddy, who was an intensive care nurse, and another person. In the moments before shots were fired, Preddy was on the ground, surrounded by multiple agents. Federal agents claimed Preddy forced their hand, alleging he violently resisted disarmament until the officers fired defensive shots. The video footage appears to tell a different story. A frame-by-frame review by the Wall Street Journal shows a federal officer pulling a handgun away from Preddy. Less than a second later, an agent fires several rounds. Preddy died at the scene. In a U.S. District Court filing late Saturday, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said federal officers had made astonishing missteps in the aftermath of the U.S. Border Patrol officer's fatal shooting of Preddy. Ellison, a Democrat, said on Sunday he was worried evidence would be lost in the investigation. I am deeply concerned about the preservation of evidence, which is why we went to court last night, Ellison said. Late Saturday, Judge Eric Tostred issued a temporary order blocking the Trump administration from destroying or altering evidence related to Preddy's death. A hearing is scheduled for Monday in Minnesota federal court. The tensions could reverberate in Washington. Senate Democrats signaled on Saturday that they would be willing to shut down much of the government rather than vote for a package that includes funds for immigration enforcement following the latest deadly shooting in Minneapolis. When asked whether Homeland Security would work with local law enforcement, Noem said Minnesota Governor Tim Walz couldn't be trusted and accused the state of releasing dangerous criminals from prison onto the streets rather than handing them over to ICE. Saturday evening, the Minnesota Department of Corrections accused Noem of falsely saying the state doesn't cooperate with ICE. Trump says killing is being reviewed by Josh Dawsey, Washington. President Trump declined to say whether the federal officer who fatally shot a man in Minnesota this weekend had acted appropriately and said the administration was reviewing the incident. In a 5-minute telephone interview with the Wall Street Journal on Sunday, Trump didn't directly answer when asked twice whether the officer who shot Alex Preddy had done the right thing. Pressed further, the president said, "We're looking, we're reviewing everything, and will come out with a determination." Administration officials have publicly defended the officer. The president criticized Preddy, the 37-year-old who was killed by federal Border Patrol agent Saturday morning on a Minneapolis street, for carrying a gun during protest activity. "I don't like any shooting. I don't like it," Trump added. "But I don't like it when somebody goes into a protest and he's got a very powerful, fully loaded gun with 2 magazines loaded with bullets also. That doesn't play good either." Trump also signaled a willingness to eventually withdraw immigration enforcement officials from the Minneapolis area. Wall Street starts to cool on formerly hot software. The investor base is definitely scrutinizing these software names. By Sam Goldfarb. Software companies' pitch to investors could use an upgrade. Once a favorite of Wall Street, software stocks have been sliding lately, with investors increasingly concerned about how the sector could be upended by their newest crush, artificial intelligence companies. Rocked by the emergence of vibe coding, the practice of using AI tools to quickly produce apps and websites, software heavyweights, Salesforce, Adobe, and ServiceNow are all down at least 30% since the start of last year. An S&P index of small and mid-sized software stocks is also down more than 20% over that period, with declines accelerating this month after the introduction of Anthropic's Claude Code, an AI tool that industry insiders have said can dramatically shrink the time it takes to build even complex software. At a time when many investors are wondering if the AI investment boom itself might be a bubble, software's slump is a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change on Wall Street. Beijing accuses top general of giving U.S. nuclear data. Zhang allegedly leaked core technical data on nuclear weapons to the U.S. by Lingling Wei and Chunghang Wang. China's senior-most general is accused of leaking information about the country's nuclear weapons program to the U.S. and accepting bribes for official acts, including the promotion of an officer to defense minister. People familiar with a high-level briefing on the allegations said. The briefing, attended on Saturday morning by some of the military's highest-ranking officers, came just before China's Ministry of National Defense made the bombshell announcement of an investigation into General Zhang Yuxia, once considered Chinese leader Xi Jinping's most trusted military ally. The people familiar with the briefing, which hadn't been reported until now, said Zhang is under investigation for allegedly forming political cliques, a phrase describing efforts to build networks of influence that undermine party unity, and abusing his authority within the Communist Party's top military decision-making body, known as the Central Military Commission. Authorities are also scrutinizing his oversight of a powerful agency responsible for the research, development, and procurement of military hardware. Those familiar with the briefing said Zhang was alleged to have accepted huge sums of money in exchange for official promotions in this big budget procurement system. The most shocking allegation disclosed during the closed-door briefing, the people said, was that Zhang had leaked core technical data on China's nuclear weapons to the U.S. Some analysts said Xi's latest crackdown on corruption and disloyalty in the armed forces marks the most aggressive dismantling of China's military leadership since the Mao Zedong era. China learns from animals to train an AI-driven military. Beijing researchers study hawks and coyotes